Hello and welcome, and today we do a special episode on time travel. It's something that's been on my mind as of late for various reasons, and I'd like to briefly discuss some of my favorite time travel episodes from other TV shows. Time travel can be an interesting thing. You can create an alternate timeline where everything that can go wrong has go wrong, all because of the actions or inactions of a single character. Or you can create an alternate timeline where no matter what you do, the future cannot be altered, and all of your actions set up the events that put the series that you are a part of into motion. Let's look at some examples and compare. We see a couple of examples in Futurama. In the movie Bender's Big Store, we see Fry go back to the past, and Bender goes back into the past to try and kill Fry so that he can help preserve the future timeline. And everything that Bender attempts to do while he's in the past results in causing events that are in the future. Another similar example is when Fry was trapped by the intelligent brain race, and he chose to go back in time to prevent himself from being frozen so that he wouldn't end up in the 30th century and he wouldn't be almost killed while trapped in a room full of brains. What Fry realized was that he has some importance in the future timeline, and he gets an opportunity to do something that was a nice little twist for the series. He actually gets to choose whether or not he wants himself to be frozen and sent through time. And if you watch the very first episode of Futurama, this is actually in canon drawn into that very first episode. You see the shadow of Fry and Nibbler in the background as Fry goes into the Chrono Freezer and gets frozen and sent into the future. What you don't realize until this time travel episode happens is that that was actually Fry choosing to push himself into the freezer to guarantee that he goes into the future. Back to the Future, whenever Marty changes history, for better or for worse, he creates alternate timelines. Alternate to the time travelers, but reality for everybody else. The most memorable alternate timeline that Marty creates is the alternate 1985, wherein Biff is powerful and successful and guides his success through reading predictions in a futuristic book that are destined to come true. And as long as Biff reads from the book, he can use his knowledge of the future to guide the decisions that he makes in life, and he can always be a winner. To this end, Biff also has killed George McFly, remarried the woman of his dreams, and he's built a casino. He's allowed the school to fall into ruins. He's allowed Hill Valley to become a post-apocalyptic world full of shooting and crime and corruption. And everything has just gone wrong. This sends Doc and Marty back to fix things, and Marty has to get the futuristic book back to prevent Biff from taking over, which leads to more events that create more alternate timelines, whereas Doc says in the ending of the trilogy, the future isn't written in stone, it's whatever you make of it. Star Trek has many different interpretations of time travel. In some episodes, they make major changes to the timeline, and in other episodes, they do the exact set of changes that they are required to do to make sure that the timeline remains preserved up to a certain point. In yesterday's Enterprise, we see what would happen if the Enterprise C never saved a bunch of Klingons and never preserved the peace between the Klingons and the Federation, and how things change for the Enterprise crew. And we learned that Natasha Yar is destined to go back in time and help preserve the Next Generation timeline that we all know. Then on Next Generation, we get to see multiple alternate timelines when Worf finds himself tripping through the multiverse, experiencing multiple different possible outcomes for his future. And in the episode All Good Things Must Come to an End, we also see an alternate future timeline, one which does not come true thanks to the events in the Star Trek movies. So that's yet another timeline that was prevented. There was an episode where Picard and crew go back to examine why Data's head is on Earth in the past at an archaeological site, and they follow a bunch of aliens back in time to the days of Mark Twain, accidentally bringing Mark Twain with them to the future and setting into motion a sequence of events that are destined to happen. No matter what they do, they're not able to prevent Data's head from being detached and lost in the past. And in fact, they use this information to their advantage and use Data's head to send messages from the past into the future. And then we have Trials and Tribulations, where the Deep Space Nine crew goes back in time to the day of Kirk, and they get fitted right into the background of events of the classic original series episode, The Trouble with Tribbles. And the characters have to make sure that their actions preserve the timeline and make sure that they prevent the timeline from being altered, and they have to make sure that everything they do keeps history on track according to how history said the events had to play out. There's another Deep Space Nine episode where the characters go back in time and get stranded on a planet. They can't leave the planet, so they end up having to fall in love with each other and have children and produce multiple generations and multiple bloodlines. Those multiple bloodlines populate the planet and start a colony. But Odo, not wanting Major Kira to die in the time travel incident, decides to reset the timeline and prevents Kira from being killed and completely wipes out that entire planet's population, causing multiple generations of characters from being erased from existence because they were never born, leaving us to wonder if Odo did the morally right thing by preventing the crash from happening and preventing Kira from dying. All of episodes of Quantum Leap were interesting too. There was the episodes with the evil Leapers where there were time travelers who were intentionally trying to sabotage time to make sure things went wrong, and Sam was always putting what went wrong right. And when these two time travelers met each other, they had to battle it out and struggle to see whether one of them would continue putting stuff wrong or whether the other would continue putting stuff right. There was also the JFK episode where Sam was Lee Harvey Oswald, and he was supposed to prevent Oswald from killing Kennedy, but in the end he couldn't prevent the assassination and instead leapt into a security guard and prevented the double assassination of Kennedy and his wife, allowing Kennedy to die so that his wife could live. In other words, Sam created the timeline that the audience knew and changed history from what would have been a greater tragedy. DC Comics has had a number of great time travel episodes as well, almost as many as Star Trek. One of the most depressing is Flashpoint Paradox, where the Flash goes back in time to prevent his mother from dying, and in doing so creates a chain effect of, or a butterfly effect as you will, of other events that resulted in what is called the Darkest Timeline, a world where all of the superheroes have had their pasts completely messed up and everything's gone wrong. In other episodes, we see in Lois and Clark an episode where a time traveler named Tempest goes back in time and uses his knowledge of the future to manipulate politics to put himself in charge. And Clark Kent never became Superman. In an episode of Super Friends, as well as in a direct-to-DVD movie that was based on this episode, we see something I find very interesting. Lex Luthor uses his knowledge of the future and time traveling to go back in time and not only undo all of the events of the superheroes, but he gives the superheroes' powers to himself and the others, basically doing a whole bunch of other events that undo each of the superheroes' destinies and giving the powers that would have been the superheroes' to his evil cohorts. In the Avengers cartoon series, Dr. Doom did something very similar. He went back in time and used his knowledge of the superhero origins to mess up each of the origins. Captain America remains frozen in ice. Bruce Banner gets a special suit to prevent him from turning into the Hulk. And a number of other superheroes also have their paths pushed to the evil side, or pushed to the point where their origin stories never happened and they never got their powers or never chose to side with the forces of good. In an episode of X-Men, there are two time travel stories, one featuring Bishop and one featuring Cable, and both of them come from alternate futures, and both of them want to preserve their own timeline, so they end up in a fight trying to figure out whose timeline is the right one and whose timeline should be erased and rewritten. When you make a change to the timeline, certain characters come into existence, and when you change the past, you change the very events that created these characters in the first place. So certain people who were born in the future will never be born and will never exist. Other times, time travelers do episodes where they go on all kinds of time traveling adventures, and at the end they go back in time and prevent the time traveling from happening, so that entire episode, or maybe even entire seasons of the show, never happened. And there's tons of other things out there that exist that I haven't even begun to touch on, but I'll leave that for the comments section below. Thank you for watching, and good night.